A military parade to celebrate President Donald Trump's birthday could be rolling into D.C. this summer. It's an idea he's pushed before, and even though this time the June 14th date carries extra significance, the early plans are already raising some concerns.
Can you imagine military trucks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, these mighty heavy trucks? During his first term, President Trump did push for a similar parade, complete with tanks and military vehicles, but canceled it after the price tag ballooned to an estimated $92 million.
Bobby Jones here for Midas Touch and Valor Media Networks. And today I want to focus on something that's really been bothering me in the background of all the policy changes and the distractions that have occurred since the second Trump administration has began. Now, I know the media is focused on the economy, and rightly so. However, we can't lose sight on the multiple things that are happening simultaneously in the background. I'm an Annapolis graduate, retired Navy commander, so I naturally gravitate to what's happening with our armed forces. So today, I want to do something where I roll up everything that we have seen in the second administration of Donald Trump. He says he supports the troops, but let's take an analytical look at what he's actually doing. Do his words match his deeds? And to do that, I'm going to focus on three major aspects: leadership, policies, and strategy. So starting with leadership, let's look at three major groups of leaders: Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Secretary of Defense, when you compare the current holder of the office, Pete Hegseth, with his predecessor, Lloyd Austin, to be very blunt, there really isn't a comparison. Pete was a retired major in the Army and Army National Guard, multiple tours, combat deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, which I will never downgrade or dismiss. I want to thank him for his service. However, his main notoriety was being on Fox News and Friends weekends. And that's where Donald Trump got to know who he was. He loved the fact that he advocated on his behalf, and that is why he is sitting in the seat. And if we're talking about qualifications, when you compare that to Lloyd Austin, a former four-star general in charge of United States Central Command, a West Point graduate, and had operational and command at every level in the United States military, there's no comparison. There really isn't. Compared to Pete Hegseth, Lloyd Austin is overqualified. He spent more time in operational ready rooms making life and death decisions, while Pete Hegseth was sitting in green rooms behind stage at TV studios talking about things, conjecturing about things, not actually having to be on the hook to be accountable, responsible for those things. And that's a major difference. And when you take a look at what happened with Signalgate, there is the difference in experience, there is the difference in execution, but most importantly, there is the difference in responsibility. There's no way in the world that General Austin, or to be completely honest, any other Secretary of Defense that I know of in the last 30, 40 years, would be so cavalier with the security of his or her troops like Pete Hegseth was. Now, when you look at National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, former U.S. Congressman, former Green Beret, retired lieutenant colonel, highly educated. On paper, he looks like someone that should actually probably be in the role. But again, Signalgate shows us there's a cavalierness to his attitude towards national security, and he is the National Security Advisor. You compare him with his predecessor, Jake Sullivan, a Rhodes Scholar, a diplomat who worked in multiple White Houses and has many people who respect him all over the world. I would dare say Jake Sullivan wouldn't do the same thing, but most importantly, I would also say Jake Sullivan is probably more trusted by other governments than Mike Waltz is, based on what's happened here in the first 80 days of the Trump administration. So moving from there to the actual uniformed personnel, you have the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You have General Brown, who was unceremoniously fired by Pete Hegseth, who, by the way, flat out said before that he had no business being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, despite the thousands of hours of combat, despite the fact that he was a fighter pilot, despite the fact that he has had operational command at every level and is only the second black man to hold that position after General Colin Powell. Somehow or another, Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump thinks he's unqualified. And what really makes it ridiculous is the person they've nominated to take his place was a retired lieutenant general, a 3-star, meaning he's naturally not qualified for the position, in Dan Raising Cane. Now, he has a great combat record, but he does not meet the requirements and statutes set forth by Congress in the Goldwater-Nichols Act. Period. You have to be a 4-star. You've had to have the highest level of operational command, and or you had to be chairman or leader of your branch of service. He qualifies under none of that. But the one thing Trump has made a point to tell people, he's been loyal, he wore a MAGA hat, and he said he'd kill for him. What we have seen is loyalty is the only qualification that Donald Trump looks for our most sensitive and most important positions regarding national security, and everybody should pause. So when I look at leadership and I ask, has Donald Trump supported the troops by putting the best possible leadership in place? The answer is unequivocally no, and we're seeing it in real time. Now let's talk about policies. Policies are basically ways of operating, ways of thinking that are supposed to benefit people in whatever you've tasked them to do. So with this second term of the Trump administration, the first thing off the bat, hiring freeze, budget freeze, and civilian cuts. As great as the United States military is, it relies heavily on career civilian workers to make things happen, from the logistics that win wars to the subject matter expertise that allows for weapons and tactics to be developed. Within 48 hours of coming into the White House, the second time, there was a freeze across the board. And it had an effect on service members all over the world, people who were actually in transit to their next duty station, in transit to their next training station, basically were stranded. And then the cuts started to happen. And people who have trained our soldiers, people who have trained our service members, people who have the subject matter expertise to help develop tactics against oncoming threats were unceremoniously dismissed. Many of them were in critical positions to which the Trump administration had to scramble to try to get them back, and in some cases lacked the contact information to do it. They took that chainsaw that Elon Musk talked about to something that required a delicate scalpel when looking for savings and looking for fraud, waste, and abuse. What has happened is it has shaken the civilian side to its core in a supportive Department of Defense. They come to work not knowing if today is the day they're going to be fired or not. And that's a lot. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the service members who rely on their expertise don't know if they're going to be there. And when you go downrange, when you go over the horizon, or whatever you want to call it, you rely on a stable group of subject matter experts to make sure you are able to execute the mission. Did not happen. Is not happening. And most importantly, we don't know how long this limbo is going to last. Now, moving to personnel policies, the transgender ban. 14,000 service members woke up one day being told that they are about to be removed from the United States military. Up to 14,000. If you don't think that has ripple effect on your manpower and most importantly on the morale of your troops, you're crazy. You're absolutely crazy. People who have served without any reservation are now being shown the door when we are living in an environment where it's harder and harder for us to find qualified recruits who are both willing and able to meet the requirements of enlistment. And then when you take a look at those policies, it kind of feeds into the whole DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion rollbacks that have disproportionately affected the military because you have diverse minority groups that are overrepresented in the United States military. So now you have erased a lot of the history that those minority groups have fought to earn. By telling them it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, you come up with policies that you want to look at, such as grooming standards that will disproportionately affect minorities moving forward, and you create an environment after firing the diverse members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff where you may not feel you're going to get a legitimate shot to be promoted, all in less than 80 days. all in less than 80 days. But you're telling me you support the troops. And if that's not enough, like I said, you've erased the history, you're dealing with the present, now you want to affect the future. You have book bans at the United States Service Academies, one of which being my alma mater, the United States Naval Academy. You're telling them, we don't want you to expand your mind and learn about the world outside of this bubble, even though we expect to deploy you to that world and you have to be combat effective. It makes zero sense. We are ill preparing our future officers. We are making life harder for those currently enlisted, and we are erasing the history of those who fought and gave their lives for this country to still be here. That's not supporting the troops in my mind. And then finally, let's just talk strategy for a second. Within 80 days, the United States of America has undone a lot of the work that 80 years prior to fought to establish. So when you look at NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the most powerful alliance founded by the United States, the most powerful alliance in the history of mankind that has single-handedly avoided World War III, we have now taken a step back in the role. We are no longer considered the leaders of NATO. As a matter of fact, there are people who are speculating we may not be a part of NATO moving forward. That is scary. And the millions of people who died to create a peaceful world order are now being left behind, and those sacrifices being ignored by the current administration. Now your troops will deploy from the United States, not knowing if they have true allies that have their back, because we have gone out of our way to alienate them. Are there things that can be tweaked in the alliance? Of course there are. But you sure as heck don't sit there and go out of your way to disrespect all the allies that have fought with you, specifically the United States, after activating the self-collective Article 5 after 9/11, who died in the same fields with American service members. You don't go out of your way to disrespect them in such a way that you cannot continue to forge an alliance. And in the vacuum of America leaving NATO, our rivals are slowly filling that vacuum. They're creating new alliances, new trade alliances, new military alliances, just a new way of thinking, because we believe that America first is best. We've seen that before. And what we've learned, going back to prior to World War II, is America first means America isolation, which means America has to deal with the rest of the world on its own. And that is never a good proposition. Along those lines, our two closest allies, Canada and Mexico, have felt the effect of these radical shifts, right? To the point where one of the reasons Michael Waltz was selected as National Security Advisor is because he's advocating for the United States military to mobilize and fight Mexican cartels in Mexico without congressional approval, without the approval of Mexico, which is, last I checked, a sovereign nation. So let's just think about this for a second. If we have forces that go into Mexico without permission and things go sideways, what's the ramifications of that? And most importantly, how will that affect the service members that are currently wearing the uniform? Look, I can highlight many other things that I have missed in detail just with this roll-up. Alien Enemies Act, the deportation of immigrants, some of which who have served in the military. I can go all day in detail, but the three major takeaways that I have is the leadership is worse than before, because all it does is separate the United States military. It separates service members within the ranks of the military, and it erases the contributions of everybody that's in the military. And two, this is a direct result of the divisive politics where the most unified group of Americans should always be your military. You cannot go fight a war if you are fighting wars internally. Period. And if your leadership does not show that they take the job serious, i.e. Signalgate, i.e. mass firings without really doing the vetting, how can they, the troops, then trust that they're being sent on behalf of the United States with the United States' best interests in mind? And finally, number three, American isolationism does not work. It historically has not worked. There's a reason that our military grew to the size that it did. And there's a difference between being a participant in the world order or being a leader in the world order, or in this case, isolating yourself and pissing the entire world off. We have some fundamental changes that have happened in the American military. And all three of these things that I've highlighted here, personnel, policy, strategy, none of them have benefited the actual warfighter that they claim to care about so much.